Now we're going to start, and I'm not going to introduce Peter McKinnon in detail because we did that at the last presentation, and you had a bit of his bio. But I am going to say that the last time Peter was here, he did talk to us about AI and geopolitics, and he did talk to us about AI that comes on suddenly, just that it's been around for the before, but more so in the last 50 years. AI in Canada, so you found out where we were at, and then he talked about a brief history. So he gave us a wonderful history of AI, and he talked about disruptive technologies and dual use of the use of AI, and then he made a general summary. We didn't get much of the disruptive technology because he wasn't able to finish, and he wasn't able to talk too much about the dual use of perspective. But one of the things that he did tell us was that a lot of his work was about the ethics, the ethical uses of AI as well. So I know that that'll probably come up today, and for those who haven't seen the first one he did, you can go to our website and you can press on the YouTube link. We have already had 86 people looking at this video, so I think it's wonderful. And Peter also sent the link of an article in the Citizen paper where he was interviewed, and that it was also a very interesting read, so I encourage you to do that if you haven't done so. And I think I'm going to go back and listen to the video again because you said you put a lot of stuff on, a lot of words up on your slides, but that was so that, people who went back to it could remember what it was you said. And I found that was true when I went back to hear it again. So I'll go back again because it was chock full of really great stuff. So we're looking forward to what you're going to tell us today, Peter. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be asked to come back, and it's a great pleasure to speak to friends and colleagues and new people that I haven't met before in regard to some of the things I'm interested in. So as you know from my background, I have been involved in this area for quite a while. So I'll just quickly show you as we do the agenda. I've got 10 points on here, and I'm going to go through the first little bit quickly because they're going to basically question who was not here for the January. And who has not seen the video that was just referred to? Good. Okay, that's why I'm going to do a little bit of quickie at the start, which will put you on the same page for where we're going to go from here. And I'll concentrate on the stuff at the bottom end, which is what Madeline was just talking about. Okay? If there's any questions, please ask, but only if it's a clarification type question. If you want to change the topic, let's save that to a Q&A session. And as Madeline mentioned, and just to get things on the stage here, I've got lots of material on the slides. It's color-coded, so the stuff that's yellow or orangey type, that's the main things I want to say, but the white stuff is sort of the connectors, and so when you go back and look at it, it'll make a little more sense. So the stage we'll start with, and this is actually, as a background, I'm actually involved in the Institute of Life, which is run out of MIT, and it has several programs. One of their programs is in artificial intelligence. I got an email from them yesterday, and this image was in fact the background to the message. So I thought, I think I'll use that. So this is the first time I've used it. It's right off that website from yesterday. So setting the stage. Well, you've seen this, for those who were here before, you saw this roughly, but I'm going to summarize it slightly differently. The point I want to make here is that over the course of history, my perspective is that we've really had three major periods of human kind of organization. The first was really related to the control of land and dominated for over 5,000 years now. So we still have that. All kinds of issues about control of land. And in fact, that's often in the news these days about real estate and insurance, and storms, and things like that. So control of land is still a big giant issue. And there's certain elites that control these things. Then along came the machines. Well, that was actually several thousands of years later. You'll notice that the steps are about a multiple of 50. So we have also then the machines of about 500 years. And these were special purpose machines that could only do one thing, basically. Now we have machines that can manipulate massive amounts of data using artificial intelligence and robotics they can control, and so we now have multi-purpose machines. So we have now a new era that's only been with us for about 50 years. So what I'm about to say is like we're changing the world, but are we changing the world on a grand scale? Well, it's hard to say, but we see the rate of change is accelerating. So perhaps this is very meaningful in the sense of our advancement. The main thing then is that these ways of, let's call it control, ended up restructuring the way we did things. So the control of land for many thousands of years has basically been manual labor of man and beast. And then by the time we got to this age of the machine, steam engines, things like that, we got machine-assisted labor-saving devices. And that diversified job options. People made machines now that didn't make them before. As well then, we're now into the era of the cognitive tools for social use. So I didn't say good and I didn't say bad. So use means it could be either.
Quick question.
Yes.
I notice a progression from from control to use.
Mm-hmm.
So how much of that last one, cognitive tools for societal control, is relevant?
It's a good question. We're right in the middle of that space right now, and I'll address it with other questions perhaps as we go along. Please come back to that at the end if it's not satisfactory. So I now also want to characterize what I call the future of history. I think I used this slide before. Why I want to do this is because this also sets the stage. The machine of the Industrial Revolution did all the things that we've just talked about. What really did everything that turned that upside down was the way our social ways of organizing ourselves, the rise of the corporation, the rise of financial support to finance things, the age of transport and so on, all started. And this had huge, profound impact on the way society was organized. And the view is that many not the AI technical people, they're the engineers and computer science types, but those who say the philosophers, the economists, people like myself sort of look at the problems from different perspectives. We're seeing that there's potentially a profound impact that AI will have on the entire structure of society, at least as significant as the industrial age, and maybe more so. And we don't know the maybe, but we see that there could be. There's certainly the energy there to have it. So let's turn to AI and geopolitics, because that's the hot topic these days. I found this rather interesting cartoon. It's rather relevant as well. The United States has typically been the world's leader in artificial intelligence. It started in the US in the 50s, and it's always been a nonchalant, laissez-faire approach. There's never been national strategies and so on to do anything there. But more recently, in the last decade or so, China's really come on quite strongly in terms of building basically from very little. And China now has a huge national program, national objective of being the #1 country in the world by 2030, which is only 10 years away. And the United States has no program of any particular sort, but there is a recent executive order from the President of the United States that says the United States should do stuff about AI. And public data should be made more available to companies. You can see there's a flag back here for Canada. And this cartoon, I have no idea who drew it, like what country it's from, but it wasn't from Canada. Anyway, Canada is a major leader in AI, as I may have stressed before, but primarily in the area of research, laboratory, and we'll get onto that a little more later. So suddenly AI has popped into in our visions, our view, the news, and so on all the time. You hear it, I think, quite frequently, and it's always stories about promise and peril. It seems to be two extremes. And we also see now that political leadership all over the world is saying things about AI, so it's not just us, in terms of wanting to know more. Political leaders are saying things about it and do understand what it's about and its implications. So all these things are happening, but meanwhile, the important things that I think that are really part of the societal integration of AI into society are these things, ethics, efficacy, and the philosophical implications. These are not keeping up at the pace of technical development and the application of technology. So this, I think, is a very critical area, and that's why I'm particularly focusing my efforts in that area. So It's now a competition between states, and I was just pointing out with the flags, notably the U.S. with its laissez-faire approach and China with its national strategy. And in the case of China, it's billions of US dollars is being poured into their national strategy. In the case of the United States, billions of everybody's money is being put into whatever they're doing, but there's no coordinated strategy. And these are the sort of key issues that are on the geopolitical agenda that are making AI an issue. Perhaps probably the most important one in the long term, outside of economic benefit, is the military and intelligence use of AI, and we'll explore that a little further with the question of AI wars, question mark. Okay, we'll look at that. So, there's enormous potential for also disrupting the way we govern ourselves. Whether we are a state that is a single kind of leadership, as in a dictatorship, or whether we're a state that's a democracy with multi-parties and so forth, the misuse of this technology is now at a point where it looks like the real stuff, whether it's fake news, video images, texting, all kinds of things. It can be very seriously distorted through the technical advances that have taken place using AI-type methodologies. So, hard to discriminate fake news, ever-increasing echo chambers, which is something that was never dreamed of by those who invented the social media system. We see election meddling, and we're already hearing from our own intelligence services that election meddling has already started in Canada in terms of electronic election meddling. And then there's purposeful disruption of critical infrastructure. That's something that is, in fact, a very serious concern because critical infrastructure can be affected relatively easily. It has rather modest security on it, and it can be done at a distance. So you don't know where it comes from. This is a very serious issue for those who have to deal with that as a problem and don't sleep at night. And the Big Brother issue, monitoring citizens, that's a component of the AI and geopolitics. And in the case of China, monitoring citizens is not seen by Chinese citizens as being a bad thing. They see social credit as a good thing. This is a program called social credit. Whereas in, say, countries like ours, we consider the government monitoring of our, mobile phones and all these kind of stuff and our bank accounts as a normal process of day-to-day things is not, that's an infringement. I mean, if obviously you're being investigated for criminal activity, that happens, but we're not talking about this is an everyday thing. So, quickly again, starting about 2017, you notice Canada is the first flag on this map. We were the first country in the world to actually announce a national strategy. And we did so just before Singapore. And Singapore typically is always first in these sort of things. So we actually beat out Singapore. But nonetheless, these are programs since mid-'70s. These are various kinds of major initiatives that took place according to the various parts of the world that you can see here. The next slide is just to show you, and you're not supposed to understand this in any detail, it's just to be clutter. That's the point, is this is clutter on purpose. This is a map of the infrastructure of AI in Canada based on companies. And it's color-coded and classified in detail. You can study it on the slide when you get the deck. But it's divided, each part of these segments is a part of the country. So like this is, Toronto and so on and so forth. But the point is, there are over 500 companies on this. And that's in the last 10 years. So everything's new here. Like these were not companies that were around before. So it's quite amazing what's happening even in Canada in that context. The major industries that are being impacted today are these: healthcare, automotive, of course, you hear so much about the autonomous robot, the driverless car, financial services in all aspects, including insurance and so forth. Fraud detection is a big issue, big opportunity, in fact, using AI in that area, but it's a particular type of AI. And in transport and logistics. These are the big movers today in terms of industrial sectors in the world that are embracing AI and using it. PricewaterhouseCoopers did a major survey of AI possibilities in terms of value add to national economies and published it in 2017, which is only a few months ago. And they have about $15.7 trillion of added GDP to the world economy by 2030. Same target date as China plans to be the world's leader in AI. So you can see that this is the breakdown. 26% to China, 14.5% to North America. I might point out that even last year, of the, can't remember the number, let's say 20 billion in venture funds that were invested around the world in AI companies, 46% of that money went to companies in China. And only about 32% went to companies in the United States. So there's huge shifts going on right now, even in the deep down areas of industry development. So let's now, that was sort of a review. Yes, Zach?
Question, how much of that is to Canada?
Insignificant. I mean, we're at about $1 billion public and private money in Canada right now. So let's talk a little bit about AI. This is just for those to give you a sense of what's it's all about. There's three things that are driving AI today. The thing you hear about algorithms all the time, well, algorithms are just sort of a mathematical formula, but expressed in computer ways of doing things, so a digital way of laying out a process. And there's some very complicated ways of structuring algorithms. We'll cover a bit of that in a moment. Increasing power in computer networking, and in distribution of computing power, like the cloud computing, as you often hear. This has been critical to the development of AI, as has been the ability to capture and store massive amounts of data. So these two factors have actually allowed AI to have rebirth in the last decade. And I'll explain a little bit more as we deep drill in a little bit. So the AI comes in three flavors, as I call it. The type of AI we have today is narrow or weak AI, as it's sometimes called. General or strong AI is a general purpose. What we're looking to have is machines that are equivalent to cognitive processes of an average normal human would be what we call general AI. And then the stuff that most people think about when they think about artificial intelligence is the super intelligence, the Terminator type stuff. And that's very much, way beyond our capacity as humans in terms of its science fiction potential. So let's look at those now in a timeline. Narrow AI is now. This is an example of a recognition camera system and how it can identify different parts of images and so forth. These are very common types of things, and they actually move around as the images move. So that's AI now. It's very powerful in many things it can do, but it's still very narrow compared to what's possible. General AI is emerging, and I suspect that before 2100, we'll see some pretty sophisticated general purpose AI. And the super intelligent stuff, I think, is really way off in the distance, and it's still very much science fiction. So the breakthroughs in narrow AI, which is the stuff we're talking about today, the main technical concept is called deep learning or machine learning. Okay, I just want to explain a little bit about this because I think it's really important that we all know about this in regard to, for example, the use of this stuff. So, deep learning, the most successful part of deep learning today is the connectionist model. And the connectionist model is based on the brain, and that is synapses and neurons and stuff that are firing. So it's a neural network, if you like. And the neural network connectionist models are a process where you put things in, something happens, and you get something out. And we look at what comes out, and it says, well, it sort of makes sense. But we have absolutely no idea what happened inside the box. So the connectionist approach, despite the power it's giving us in terms of specific narrow applications, has created lots of wealth already, and certainly created a lot of hype, but it also leads to problems, potentially, we haven't seen yet. It's sort of like hacking. 25 years ago, hacking was not a big thing, but it's now you can bring down the CEO of a company by hacking an information system. So we haven't seen this type of AI penetration yet, but I can envisage where the deep learning is based on connectionist, and we don't understand the logic, because we don't, that we'll end up with a public policy issue where they've developed a connectionist-based application, let's say screening immigrants to come to the country, and it has all kinds of biases built into it that we don't even know about. And so it actually is faulty. as a public policy thing. So I think that it's important to recognize that the connections approach, which is very powerful, it's the main thing that's leading to all that, whether it's the machine vision stuff that you get with automobile stuff, or whether it's the recommendations that you're given on Netflix and what to watch. All that stuff is based on that connections model. If you're getting into finance today, let's say fraud detection, that's different. That uses a different approach. It uses stuff that was originally developed by Bayes, logician, back in the last century, 2 centuries ago. And it's known as Bayesian logic. And that's mathematical stuff, and it's if, then, that, but, stuff like that. And that is completely open, white box, traceable. We can see what the logic path is if you have to go back and find out why that decision was made. So white box stuff is much safer. And I'll move off. That was just to explain that. Let me just point out the impact on deep learning. Maybe I was just saying this. Deep learning is supposed to take on greater share of high productivity jobs. So when I mean that, it's both in the warehouse, in the shop, in the retail, and in the office. All those kind of jobs are going to be, in some respects, either under threat or will be complemented by some type of AI system, so that there will be less requirement for people having 10 people. It's get away with 5 people instead of 10 people doing the same thing, because they'll now have AI assisted stuff, and you won't have to have that high-end expert, because you can now have fewer people because the assistant is going to take over. So all kinds of implications to jobs, to pay, to profiles of employment, and so on. So that's the point about deep learning. It's supposed to take on all this kind of stuff. These tasks will require problem solving, decision making, and the kind of things that we as humans do, and do it in no thoughts about it. We just do it. Automation of this sort includes self-driving vehicles, diagnosing diseases, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Impact on millions of jobs. Think about if the driverless vehicle. Think about trucks, commercial trucks, all over the world, taxis all over the world, buses all over the world. These things are going to become automated, not in once, but by the time, let's call them your grandkids, are certainly our age, this will be a very different world. And this technology, if it succeeds, and we have some questions about if it succeeds, will have that kind of impact. Any questions or comments? No? Okay.
The first question was going to be, for later, what were the other 3 flavors? Do you know?
Oh, well, that's what I was saying. There was the narrow AI, general AI, and super intelligent.
Oh, okay.
So general AI, it's today's narrow AI. That's the apps we see today.
Yeah.
General AI is where we're actually progressing.
No, but I mean, you mentioned neural networks, Bayesian logic.
Yeah, and those are up in the narrow AI.
I gathered, okay, fine.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't too clear there. Okay, Madeline mentioned disruptive technology, so let me just quickly show you what I mean by that. Here is an example. A disruptive technology is a technology. Remember, it's a technology, not a product. This technology that changes everything around it. So any kind of company that has products or services generally offers it in different degrees. So different degrees, it will be based on time and money and performance and all kinds of characteristics that you pay for in some way or another. So time is this way, and generally time has progress. So if you look at performance, generally over time, performance is something that improves. In most cases, it's fairly linear. But there's different product lines, if you like. So the most demanding use would be here, and the lowest kind, this is maybe your kitchen tool in here, and this might be an industrial machine in a high-performance professional kitchen. Where, nonetheless, what happens is some technology comes along now and again, and it cuts through everything. And it cuts through it in a non-linear way. So the rate of change is accelerating. So this is a disruptive technology as a generic concept. And AI is a disruptive technology. So it's doing exactly this wherever it's being applied. So here are some examples of where it's being applied. And these are being applied at human performance level. So we're already at the, it's narrow AI, but it's performing at the human level. So it's a kind of general AI, but special purpose. So we're moving in the direction of general AI with this sort of stuff. And there's a lot of issues yet to be worked out. For example, self-driving vehicles. Implications. Imagine what the traffic situation is going to be like when the roads are mix of driverless cars and cars with drivers, and all kinds of incidents that happen. What are the legalities and all that kind of stuff? What are the impact on the driverless car industry? I mean, there's all kinds of potential. If a driverless car, as we've seen in some accidents in the United States in the last, let's say, 12 months, a couple of incidences that I'm aware of where somebody was killed by a driverless vehicle, and it's frozen the whole system until that's investigated and lawsuits are dealt with and criminal, all the technical issues are resolved as well. So we're at an early stage of a lot of these things, and they're all very complex. One of the most complex ones that you probably have been hearing about, and there was something in the news this morning, is genetic manipulation. And CRISPR, it's an acronym for a tool for gene sequencing. And that will be added with AI and knowledge bases added to that sort of thing. It's going to become a potentially very serious issue about infringement of human sanctity in many respects. So those are just some examples. So the dual use prospect. What I mean by dual use is that in effect AI can be good or bad. It depends. So a good analogy is a match. Is a match dangerous? Well, it depends. If you want to set the house on fire, I guess we could call that dangerous. And if you wanted to cook a meal over a log fire, then you need the match, so to speak. So AI is very similar. It has these multiple good and bad kind of uses, and they're all good and bad is a value judgment, an ethical thing, moral standards thing, and a generally accepted social norm. So you can see already just talking about AI and all these things I just mentioned, it's going to have huge impacts across society. So there are reasons for the concerns that are both technical and socioeconomic. And I think I shouldn't need to emphasize anything more here, but to date automation has meant industrial robots and computer hardware and software designed to do predictable, routine, codified tasks. That is the typical machine of the past. Now we're moving to multi-purpose machines. So they can do multiple things given their programmed nature. So there's ethical lines that are getting drawn in the sand here, and I just pose some questions. Are you for or against autonomous weapons? I'll get a little more into autonomous weapons, but let me just say an autonomous weapon is a weapon that there's no human in the loop. The machine decides who to shoot and kill, and there's no accountability either, because the robot is not got a person. It's not a person. So that's a huge issue in all kinds of areas, particularly ethics. Are you for or against fraud detection? I mean, we can now use, as I mentioned, this Bayesian approach, and it's very effective at fraud detection. We change the business model of the auditor. The auditor only samples data. The auditor only looks backwards, and they only look backwards over a year. Whereas it's possible nowadays, with the amount of data gorging through any organization, to do it all in real time. You know, if the auditors don't change their business model soon, they're going to get Ubered. And are you for or against privacy? I mean, obviously, I think most of us would say, I'll ask the question, how many feel, in the last decade or whatever measure you want, that you have been losing a certain amount of privacy in the digital world?
You've lost it all.
Right? I mean, so this is clearly, is AI dangerous? This is an issue. That's a huge issue, particularly as it becomes more embedded in the systems that we're becoming to use all the time. So the real answer is undetermined yet. Now here's some views I have on dual use. There are three kind of constraints. One, I guess we'll call it the ethics. Sort of, let's call ethics an anchor. And in that context, to create the ethics requires the people to give thought to what it's all about. So, back in 2016 and 2017, the international community, through the Institute on Life I mentioned earlier, organized an international effort as known as the Similar AI Principles, and these are a set of ethical code of conduct for researchers and practitioners building, developing artificial intelligence-based systems. And that has received a lot of prominence. It's only one of many types of documents, but it's a commitment on the part of individuals to hold to a certain standard. The reality of today is that there are goals, and then there's time to try and achieve those goals, and you need certain resources. So the fact that China has said they will be the world's leading country by 2030 is a goal, but do they have the time, 10 years, and do they have the resources, the human resources, for example, to become world leaders at that level? So, there's a reality issue at play, and then there's a promise versus reality. For example, in the first wave of artificial intelligence after the term was coined and expert systems came into being in the 1980s, the AI scientific and technical community was saying, we will have the most incredible machines in 20 years. Well, clearly they didn't. And that was promise versus reality. And as a result of that promise in those days, funding for AI research basically was withdrawn because they made too many promises that didn't deliver. And then it reemerged very slowly. And then we have the social issues as well. Of course, fear versus reality, and certainly a general fear about the future of AI, and probably because of the term, the name, AI, artificial intelligence. I mean, it just kind of has a scary kind of name to it.
Ever since Fridays.
Well, indeed. And it's interesting you should say that, Zach, because Frankenstein was written at a time when the scientific community was discovering the link between electricity and biology. And so it's very interesting. So, dual-use concerns. This is my personal view, but I think we have two existential threats that face us today, beyond pandemics and things that we can't control because they haven't broken out on us. So we keep world watch on that kind of stuff. But I think the two existential threats, one is human-made and the other one is, in this case, super intelligent. So autonomous weapons, I think, is likely in the next 25 years. Some might argue there are some types of autonomous weapons now. The ones that I would say are autonomous now, such as on the DMZ between North and South Korea, on the South Korean side, under South Korean control, there is an operator of the machine. But it doesn't have to have an operator. So if there's movement in the bush, the machine can decide that there must be somebody more than a rabbit in that bush. But it does have a human in the loop at the moment. Just in fact, a few days ago, late last week, Putin in Russia made a very major announcement. Because there's been a lot of criticism about Russia's approach to AI, and particularly in the military. He made an announcement saying there must be ethical standards for the use of AI in the Russian military. This is also the same position the United States has taken. In fact, the United States has taken a position, at least on paper, that there will always be a human in the loop until further notice. Superintelligence, I think, is way off. It's not in the next 25 years, and I can't say it's never. As a scientist, you can't say that, but it's way low. It's very low and probably will be for some time. These are the more important issues, these growing threats, and they all require a response. So cybersecurity is an increasing problem, and we're losing that battle. Cybercrime is an increasing problem. We have no control over that battle. Cyber espionage, we don't know the details of it, but we know it exists. Cyber warfare, we've seen some experiments. Probably the best examples were when there was meddling between Russia and some of the former states. It's part of the world in Latvia and Lithuania a few years ago, Georgia as well. Cyber war is probably going to happen in some way. We may even say that some of this disruption that happened with the interference in this infrastructure, because it was affecting critical infrastructure like power plants and things like that, that's a kind of an act of war. And in fact, just recently, a number of major global corporations are making a case to the insurance industry and to governments in their corporate headquarters countries that cyber attacks are an act of war. and therefore should be, treated in that way. So anyway, that's a big thing. And cyber threats to privacy, which we all just acknowledged a few minutes ago, are high. So we need to address those things here in response as soon as possible. We got to get ahead. We're behind, certainly in a couple of these areas for sure. So let's turn to the socioeconomic issues about AI, and these are all arm-waving in many respects, because this has not really happened yet. It's still to come. But there is anticipated massive impact on employment. And many of it, from a perspective of the public, see it as a loss of jobs, as opposed to gaining of jobs. Interestingly, one of the world's leaders, who's well into what AI means for his country, is Modi, if he's elected again. There's an election coming up right now. So he has recognized that in India, which, by the way, is the fourth largest producer of scientific papers in artificial intelligence, India sees a huge opportunity with AI for new jobs and transitioning out of old jobs, which is interesting. As I said before, Macron from France, he actually said one of the most challenging issues in modern society is deciding about the ethics and application of AI. So that, there's a number of interesting things going on. But again, this is the public perceptions, loss of privacy, security, and trust. We've already talked about privacy, but these three things together are collectively known in the kind of legal jargon as the triad. It's not an acronym in trying to make a triad. This is meant, triad is in three. And then there's the public fear factor, and the rise of superintelligence was maybe part of the public fear factor. So, socioeconomic impact of deep learning. Now, the reason I raised the deep learning thing is, again, coming back to the black box. Application of deep learning to these various areas will have profound impacts, and therefore it is, in fact, a major global public policy debate these days, OECD-type organizations. And we've seen a number of countries and subnational jurisdictions that have been doing experiments in basic income. And basic income is recognition that there's going to be a transition in employment. And there's got to be some way to help that transition through having income, because of the need and structure of our society. But where is the money going to come from? So maybe it's tax the robots. I mean, this model hasn't been worked out. It's still yet to come. The technology is coming, the products and services are coming, but how are we going to adapt and use them? That's still floating. So let's address some societal concerns. I've already said this is important to think about the ethical and legal issues. It covers things like responsible supervision, regulation, and governance. I mean, these are classic things in any business. In this case, social roles need to be filled by algorithms implying new design requirements, like transparency. This is the black box, white box issue. And predictability, meaning it's going to do a certain thing. It's not going to go off and do something else. I mean, there's great fear. There's all kinds of science fiction about AI, as I'm sure you're aware of, from kind of slightly nuanced to really radical kind of things. And so some of the slightly nuanced is almost imaginable, given the state of advance, particularly with respect to the ability to layer algorithms. So, in terms of the future issues, I think there will be a large number of new kinds of employment, and they will be basically knowledge intensive. So, people who lack skills in many areas that are typically we think of as knowledge-based are going to be faced with some sort of hardships of sorts. And so maybe this minimum wage is a part of the solution to that, but it's clearly not knowing exactly what's going to happen. Many people look at the retail industry, look at its transportation, logistics, and the operations of its warehouses and staffing operations where you sell, are seeing 25 to 35% displacement of employment in the next 20 years or so in retail. So those people will just not be there. So where will they go? They won't be assisted by a robot. They just won't be there. There'll still be people available, but only a few in number. And the dual use thing I've mentioned, economic value of AI is still unknown, but seems to be vast. The PwC number I showed you earlier, which is still very arm-waving in the future, but it's measured in trillions of dollars, so it's still a big number. And AI and ethics. Let's just quickly go through there. Where is the concern? Well, I just cite a couple, three here, I guess. The main public, and this is no in priority, but a main public concern is AI turning evil or gaining consciousness. I mean, that's something that is in the science fiction and also in some of the news media that you read. It's kind of loosely written. So, but the actual concern that the scientist and the philosopher are dealing with is AI turning component, so what does this say? The AI component with goals gets misaligned with our goals. I mean, we have to make machines that align with our goals, ours as humans. And if they misalign, then there's going to be problems. So this is more the concern. That's the same sort of thing here, but this is the real issue, is making sure that they don't digress. Public concern is primarily focused on robots taking jobs. Well, in fact, the real concern is the misalignment of intelligence between our intelligence and what we're building into machines. And so there's a little explanation on that here. And another major public concern is the fear of the superintelligent, which I've mentioned several times, and you're all well aware of that. I think the real concerns are the ones I pointed out earlier that are falling behind in the technology development. That's things like the ethics and moral standards about AI, philosophical issues. So let's share a few thoughts from some people. Yoshua Bengio, anyone heard of him? He's a Canadian. He is a professor in Montreal, and he is one of three people that just got the, quote, Nobel Prize in AI. He won the Alan Turing Award a few weeks ago, along with another Canadian from Jeffrey Hinton from the University of Toronto, who was actually an advisor to my AI company some years ago. And Jeffrey and Joshua are two of the three recipients of the Alan Turing Award for 2019. Actually, I guess it was a 2018 award awarded a few weeks ago. So these guys are major players. Those two names I mentioned are major players in the development of deep learning. They are, in fact, are one of the reasons they got this outstanding award is because their work, their academic work, has led to such a profound success, quote, success in the development of narrow AI. So you can probably read what his concerns are. Again, he's looking at it almost as an ethicist in terms of the use of AI. And the recent interest in AI safety, I guess we can use that term now, AI safety. Many people, of which I cite several here, who doesn't know Steve Wozniak? Everybody knows Steve Wozniak. Okay, I left that in, I put that one in because I thought maybe some people might. So you know the other names, but these are examples. Lots of folks have put their names on documents in the last 3 or 4 years about trying to lay out standards, practices, principles with respect to AI safety. And we do sense, I mean, philosophically anyway, that AI machines, ultimately, or AIs, we now can use it as a noun, the AIs, the AI this, that AI, this AI. Anyway, that in the future, this is an interesting comment at the bottom. And I mean, we don't normally think of, well, why are we on the top of the stack? But in many respects, it's because, in fact, we've outsmarted, collectively, we've outsmarted the competition, the other biological life forms around us, including perhaps, as we see in archaeology, and maybe a little bit of prehistory, that we also outsmarted our competitors, like the Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnon, etc. Anyway, because we've done that, it's going to feel kind of weird if we have some other intelligence that's even way beyond us. So AI is not moving in a single direction from an ethics point of view. We already see that in a variety of areas. I mean, you can think of, mass destruction type things, weapons of mass destruction. They've been developed, but some of them are back in the bottle, in the genie context. Others are still out there. We're still trying to stuff them in the bottle. In this case, AI hasn't got out of the bottle yet, so we're at least in a position to start trying to develop rules, regulations, and practices and penalties for those who get outside the box. So that's part of the ethical direction issue, but it's not moving in a common one. And each player in the ethical context is anticipating getting their optimal benefit from whatever they're doing. So it may be in complete opposition to some of the many others who are doing things that are, the goals may be completely misaligned. And those may be national as well, as in, say, China versus America. So AI and ethics again, the ethical questions surrounding AI systems are wide-ranging, and the answers are still way out there. We don't know. So I encourage any of you who have an interest in this to give some ethical thought, give some thought to the ethical issues of this of transformative technologies in general, and AI in particular. And let's just move on. I want to give you a warning. This is the point that civilization can only flourish as long as we win the race between the growing power of technology and the wisdom with which to manage it. And AI is right in the heart of that. And this is the dystrophic view of the future of AI.
Nice graphic.
So, the similar principles which I mentioned earlier are summarized, and you can see those in the document when you get it. I happen to be one of the signatories to that. Here is some aspects of some of the promising ethical applications of AI. So now we're turning to the positive side of things and stop looking at the negatives or the uncertain. So AI has huge potential in regard to smart cities, which is most cities of the world are moving towards what we call smart cities. Intelligent transportation systems, which include, of course, the autonomous vehicles, but also smart roadbeds and other things, autonomous robots, and energy ecosystems. These are all huge areas for the application of AI. And in manufacturing, of course, in robotics and additive manufacturing. These are additive manufacturing, like 3D printing, things like that. Fourth generation industry. Here's another quote, just to be an example of putting some caution on where we're going. This chap's well known in his as a research professor. He's both in business and in computing science, so looks at it from sort of the same kind of perspective as I do from engineering and business. There being no consensus, we should avoid strong assumptions regarding upper limits on the future AI capabilities. I think that makes sense. But it also means we have to be cautious. AI wars, and I say a question mark, because what does that really mean? There's an emerging race, but what's it for? You've probably heard this, and I mentioned it in January, but Putin is quoted by many in the Western media, and probably many of us in a conversation around a coffee, saying that the country that controls AI will control the world. Well, I mean, AI is not something that you can control as a country. It's like saying thought control is only in our country. So, I mean, that was a misnomer. Actually, as I've also pointed out before, in that same paragraph, that line, that the country that controls AI controls the world, he also said, AI is good for all of humankind, including Russia. And then he added in who controls the world. So anyway, the AI race for what? Well, it's disruptive. We've sort of established that, outlined it. It enables other disruptive technologies, so that's additive and multiplicative, which is, of course, faster adding. And AI's capabilities and capacity will define the competitiveness and advantage of nations in the future. I think this is very much the issue of what is to try and define competitive advantage for the future. So, we're talking about wars. Let's turn now to the more conventional notion of war. Conventional war and peacekeeping. First of all, over the centuries, we have accepted theory, doctrine, rules, and conventions and laws of war. So we do have, even though it's destructive, we do have certain rules about it, including things like the Nuremberg trials or now the International Criminal Court. So we have these things for conventional wars. Cyber war and cyber peacekeeping It's wide open. There's absolutely no rules. None. Zero. There's no effort to create them at the moment except by academics and legal people and so on. But governments are not working on this one. So this is a creep-eating effect. AI wars is an extension of 2, since this would be moving towards kinetic war, and again, there's no rules. So this space is wide open, and it typically is with a lot of new technologies where the new technology gets tested. So we're in a question mark quandary here. Consequently, there are no accepted rules of waging or restricting cyber warfare, or in fact, trying to create cyber peacekeeping. So let's think about these wars in a different perspective. There's hype. There's lots of hype. Some of it's positive. I mean, as the hype is true. So, excuse me, for both good and bad. And that's the dual use sense. So I'll call the good white and the bad dark. And so potential wars are heating up, firstly, in the commercial space. So yes, companies are busy competing with each other. That's a kind of war. It's a competition. We're certainly seeing brewing between states and criminal actors, activity regarding the ability to it's the state that provides the law and the law enforcement, so there's a link in this to that, and the criminals are currently sort of seem to be winning. In fact, you don't really pick up any newspaper or read a screen that says today the bank such and the bank so-and-so, the insurance company such and such lost $700 million due to hacking. We don't read that every day. It probably happens every day, but they don't put it in the papers. So, you got to be sort of all a matter of what gets out too, and who shares what information. So let's just quickly give you a military perspective, and I summarize this having looked at a number of documents from a variety of militaries, from larger militaries to small militaries, in terms of their sizes and their thinking about their doctrine. Basically, most militaries today are seeing AI as a new technology that is similar to stealth or some kind of, radar or something like that. Radar earlier, now stealth to be invisible to radar. But it can augment the ability for these types of industrial age technologies. But in actual fact, AI's impact is likely to be far greater than either stealth or precision bombing once they realize that you don't have to always have the human in the loop. And so now we have another big issue that is evolving in this regard. So the military actually are being cautious, and I pointed out Putin's remark about the need for ethics in Russian military. So that's starting to happen. That's a positive development. And this gentleman has given a long quote here about the arms AI and arms race. I'll let you look at that later, but he's a well-known authority in Australia. And in regard to the future of AI, there's been this cyclical nature to it, in which we might call it winter and springs, or springs and winters. That's the only terms that have been used so far. So we've been through 2 AI winters, 2 AI springs, and I'd say we're now probably moving into an AI summer, because it's been sustained for several years. I was in the first AI spring. This is when I got into commercializing AI. So the one we're in now, I think we're reaching a tipping point in the sense that we're becoming a summer. And in this context, potential is huge. But we'll look at some of the constraints on that in just a moment. I've already basically covered that. So here are some of the constraints, though, on AI. I'll call them disruptors. Increasing difficulty in making new breakthroughs. I mean, we're all that you hear about is the stuff that's being applied. It's already out of the lab. It's in the corporations, in products, in services. The stuff you don't hear about is some of the things I might be telling you, but it's the stuff that's still in behind closed doors. So, disruptors. There's all kinds of things that could still disrupt AI. The AI springs and AI winters, the AI winters that I mentioned, the fundamental reasons were actually that AI kept running into bottlenecks with computing resources. There wasn't enough computing. There wasn't enough storage to manage data sets, all those sorts of non-AI problems. They just didn't have the tools. So there may be some problems come up that we just can't get through in the next few years. So may have an impact, and I call that increasing difficulty in making new breakthroughs. And then there's the hardware limitations as well, which is a possibility. And there could be, something we call wildcards, things that come from another field, another discipline. It could be major breakthroughs in cognitive neuroscience that will have impact on how we understand intelligence. We're talking about artificial intelligence. We're only mimicking intelligence, and we don't know what intelligence is in a mathematical sense. New human cognitive enhancement technologies. This is sort of like the cyborg kind of stuff that's possible, but we're seeing a lot of advances, not necessarily involving AI at this point, but a lot of advances in military technologies for regenerative purposes on limbs and so on in regard to injuries and in warfare and accidents. Quantum computing could possibly have a profound impact on the computing resource requirement for doing things. A Sputnik event is a term that's been adopted more or less in the Western world since the Soviets launched their Sputnik satellite in the late 50s. And as you may recall, many of us who were educated, at least in North America, all suddenly had the new math and this and that and all kinds of other things that were all part of retooling society for STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, in the late 50s, early 60s. And it was all wrapped up in the concept of the Sputnik event. Okay, and then of course the final one, which of course is a biggie, is that the society distrusts this whole process. And we are already seeing disruptions, for example, about climate change, either inaction about climate change or not enough action or whatever, but we're starting to see citizens do things, getting on the streets. This is possible in the future. And then finally, I'll leave you with this. This is a well-known philosopher from Oxford University, Nick Bostrom. He's an existential philosopher, and I just give the quote. I don't necessarily believe this one, but he is of the view that machine intelligence is the last invention that humanity will ever need to make. That's a pretty bold statement, but he's a pretty qualified individual to stand there, at least say it, and try and defend it. So if you're interested, you could look up Nick Bostrom on the web. You find a lot of stuff by him. And I'll leave you with my precautionary note, and that is that the promise of AI may yet fizzle because of technical barriers or because of the pushback from society. And my view is that the one that's most likely to happen in this century is in fact this one, the social pushback. So I've left you with the following. I would say some of us were born in the tabulation era. Many of us have lived through the programming era. And all of us have lived in the cognitive era. And this is just the beginning. And in summary, it's the main points I've made. It's evolved over the past 60 years, fits and starts, it's emergent disruptive, it's dual purpose, limits to apply it are wide open. In other words, there's no limits, no speed limit at all. Wars are possible, both commercially, economically, and criminal. And AI will likely have a profound effect on society. And I think that's all I can say at the moment, but I'm happy to take questions and try to give answers. Thank you.